Martha Nightingale's fingers brushed against dry, brittle iron hidden in stale bread crust. The crust crumbled like dead leaves under my touch, sour and damp with age. I pried it loose with a pocket knife, the metal scraping against the knife's edge with a sound like dry bones dragging on stone. I tested its weight on my tongue, coppery, like licking a rusted coin, the taste sharp enough to make my throat close. Distant rowing oars dragged through viscous water, scrape against something yielding, the rhythm uneven, like a heartbeat struggling to beat. The hallway air hung thick with dust and the smell of mildew, peeling wallpaper revealing patches of rotten orange paint beneath. My breath fogged in the cold, the air tasting of damp wool and forgotten things. I'd been here before, in this same hallway, but yesterday the walls had been plain wood, not this peeling, bruised surface. Now the door stood where there'd been only empty space an hour ago, brass handle cold enough to burn my palm, the metal unnaturally smooth, like it had been polished by something that didn't care about fingerprints. The key in my hand felt alive, vibrating faintly against my tongue. I turned it in the lock. The sound was a wet click, like a door closing on a dead thing. The hallway beyond the door shimmered, the peeling wallpaper dissolving into something else, more like the texture of old sun-bleached bone. I saw a figure standing just beyond the threshold, its outline blurred. But the shape was mine. The same height, the same posture. My breath hitched. I stepped through. The door vanished behind me, not with a slam but a slow, wet dissolving, like ink bleeding into water. The hallway was empty again. The only sound was the scrape of oars, closer now, dragging through the dark water outside the resort's boarded windows. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm in the sudden silence. I turned, the key still clutched tight in my fist, the copper taste sharp on my tongue. The hallway stretched before me, empty, the dust motes glowing faintly green in the aurora's eerie light. I could almost hear it, the voice, mimicking my own, whispering from the empty air, "You don't belong here, Martha. Not anymore." I pressed my back against the cold wall, the peeling paint gritty under my fingers, the smell of damp wood and old blood filling my nose. The voice came again, clearer now, the words twisting in my head like a key turning in a lock. The door was never there. You made it. My hands trembled. The key felt heavier, the copper taste spreading like a stain. I looked down at my palm. For a second, the skin looked thin, translucent, the veins dark as bruises. I blinked. It was normal again, but the air still tasted of copper, and the oars scraped closer, dragging through the water outside, the sound sharp as a knife. The hallway was empty, but I could feel the other Martha standing just behind me, breathing on my neck, her breath cold, as the brass handle had been. The map lay unrolled across my knees like a dying thing, its edges frayed into a jagged line of blackened teeth. The bloodstains had dried into a glossy sheen, slick as varnish, the color of bruised plums left too long in the sun. My fingertip dragged through the dark smear, and the stain parted like wet clay, clinging to my skin in sticky strands. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my throat, and the whisper came again. My voice, but wrong, the words stretched thin as old taffy. "You left the fire unattended." The words curled around my skull, embedding themselves behind my eyes. The map twitched beneath me, the parchment shuddering like a living thing. The bloodstains pulsed, slow and deliberate, the edges of the marks bleeding outward in uneven ripples. The room smelled of burnt sugar and something older, something that had festered in the walls before the resort was built. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, the peeling wallpaper exhaling a damp sigh. Each time my breath fogged the glass of the window. Outside, the green glow of the aurora bled through the cracks in the boards, casting the room in a sickly light, the color of mold left too long in the dark. I pressed my palm flat against the map, the heat of my skin making the bloodstains soften further, the edges running like syrup. The words shifted, rearranging themselves into a shape I didn't recognize. Rooms I hadn't seen, hallways that shouldn't exist. My fingers trembled, not from cold but from the weight of the thing beneath the map, something heavy and wet pressing against the floorboards. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. "The next door now bears your name." The words settled into my bones, a cold weight. I traced the new mark with my fingertip, the bloodstain cool against my skin, the texture of wet ash. The door wasn't on the map before. Now it was there, carved in fresh dark, the letters jagged and uneven, like something written in haste. My name, my own name scrawled in blood that wasn't mine. The cat sat on the edge of the bed, its ancient eyes fixed on me. The fur around its whiskers had gone thin, the gray hairs brittle as dried twigs, the cataracts clouding its irises like milk left too long in the sun. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched me with a patience that made my skin crawl. The air between us hummed, a low vibration that set my teeth on edge. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. I reached for the cat, my fingers brushing against its shoulder. The fur was coarse, the texture of old rope, and beneath it, the muscle felt loose, like something that had long since given up on holding its shape. The cat didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Its breath was slow, a wet rasp that filled the silence between us. The whispers in my head sharpened, the words twisting into something sharper, something that cut. You don't remember, do you? The voice wasn't mine. It was older, deeper, the sound of a throat that had never known youth. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled. The sensation like the first cold breath of winter. I pulled my hand back, but the cat didn't move. It just sat there, watching me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The map pulsed again, the bloodstains spreading outward in slow, deliberate waves. The room tilted, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. Few left the fire unattended. The words settled into my bones, a cold weight. The cat's tail twitched again, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. I looked down at the map, at the bloodstains spreading outward in slow, deliberate waves, at the door carved in my name. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's eyes never left mine. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched me with a patience that made my skin crawl. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The whispers in my head sharpened, the words twisting into something sharper, something that cut. I reached for the cat again, my fingers brushing against its shoulder. The fur was coarse, the texture of old rope, and beneath it, the muscle felt loose, like something that had long since given up on holding its shape. The cat didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Its breath was slow, a wet raft that filled the silence between us. You don't remember, do you? The voice wasn't mine. It was older, deeper, the sound of a throat that had never known youth. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. I pulled my hand back, but the cat didn't move. It just sat there watching me with those milky eyes. The bloodstains on the map had reached the edges of the parchment, spreading outward in slow, deliberate waves. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's tail twitched once more, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. I looked down at the map, at the bloodstains spreading outward in slow, deliberate waves, at the door carved in my name. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. I reached for the cat, my fingers brushing against its shoulder. The fur was coarse, the texture of old rope, and beneath it, the muscle felt loose, like something that had long since given up on holding its shape. The cat didn't flinch. It didn't pull away. Its breath was slow, a wet rasp that filled the silence between us. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The cat watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched me with those milky eyes. Its breath still, that slow, wet rasp. I looked down at the map, at the bloodstains spreading outward in slow, deliberate waves, at the door carved in my name. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling. The syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. I reached for the cat, my fingers brushing against its shoulder. The fur was coarse, the texture of old rope, and beneath it, the muscle felt loose, like something that had long since given up on holding its shape. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The cat watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar, and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat's tail twitched, the tip brushing against my wrist. The fur was rough, the texture of sandpaper, and where it touched my skin, the flesh prickled, the sensation like the first cold breath of winter. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The oars outside scraped against the boards, the sound dragging through the water like a blade through flesh. The bloodstains had reached the edges of the map. The room tilted again, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt sugar and something older, something that had been buried long before the resort was built. The whispers coiled tighter, wrapping around my ribs, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The cat didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched me with those milky eyes, its breath still that slow, wet rasp. The door was there. My name was carved in blood. The whispers wrapped around my ribs, tightening, and I could feel my own voice unraveling, the syllables splitting apart like overripe fruit. The salt grains crunched underfoot, each step echoing like distant thunder across the wooden floorboards. I poured more from the packet into the cat's bowl, watching as its pink tongue lapped at the crystals, the sound sharp and rhythmic, a metronome ticking away time in some otherworldly dimension. The clocks had frozen again, all 12 of them scattered throughout the room like silent sentinels. Their hands pointed accusingly at 3:07, their faces blank as if holding their breath. I reached out to touch one, its glass cool and smooth under my fingertips, the second hand trembling on the cusp of movement. The cat looked up from its bowl, its cataracts milky pools reflecting nothing but a blur of light and shadow. It didn't move, just watched me with that ancient patience, as if it knew something I didn't, something important, something urgent. I turned back to the clocks, my reflection staring blankly at me from their faces. Behind mine, the room was bathed in an eerie green glow, cast by the aurora outside. The light flickered through the cracks in the boards nailed across the window, casting a macabre dance of shadows on the wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin. The cat's breath rasped wetly from its throat, each exhale misting the air between us. I could feel my own breath fogging up too. But when I looked back at my reflection in the clock's faces, there was no condensation, no sign of life beyond the glass. Just me and those empty eyes staring out. The cat's whiskers twitched, writing something only it understood onto the air. Its cataracts shifted slightly, revealing a flash of irises that were not quite right, too pale, too human. Like in their emptiness, I leaned closer to see better, my own breath fogging up again. And there it was, a face staring back at me from behind those milky eyes. My face, but age decayed, deep lines etched into the skin like cracks in dried clay, hair thin and white as bone, lips pulled taut over teeth yellowed by time. I stumbled back, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped animal. The cat didn't move, just watched me with that ancient patience. Its whiskers twitched again, writing something else onto the air. I could take my eyes off those empty sockets filled with an aged version of myself. The room grew colder around us, the temperature dropping so fast it felt like winter had blown in through an open door. The cat's breath misted heavily now, filling the silence between us until there was nothing but that wet rasp and the sound of salt crystals crunching underfoot, as I took another step back. The clock seemed to glow brighter suddenly, their hands trembling on the cusp of movement again. But they didn't move. Not yet. Not while those empty eyes watched me from behind the cat's cataracts. I reached out tentatively towards the bowl, my fingers brushing against its cool rim just as the cat snapped up, its whiskers twitching one last time before it turned away, leaving only blank milky pools staring back at me. The clock's hands jerked suddenly into life, their seconds ticking off in unison like a chorus of tiny hearts beating out some ancient rhythm. And then they stopped again, freezing once more on 3:07 as the cat's tail twitched, its tip brushing against my wrist. A rough caress that sent shivers down my spine. The fur was coarse, the texture of old rope, and where it touched my skin the flesh prickled like gooseflesh, the sensation crawling up my arm like something alive. I looked back at the clocks, their faces reflecting nothing but empty rooms and blank walls now. Behind mine, there was only darkness. No sign of that decayed face staring out from behind cataracts gone suddenly black as ink. The cat's breath rasped wetly in the silence, each exhale misting the air between us until it felt like we were trapped underwater together, drowning slowly in this green glow cast by some ancient aurora outside. And then I heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from somewhere nearby, something sharp dragging through water. The oars outside scraped against the boards again, their rhythm steady and unhurried, as if someone was rowing out there beyond our doorless room, waiting patiently for something only they knew about. Waiting for me to look away from those black pools, reflecting nothing but darkness back at myself. The pair's skin split with a sound like a dry branch snapping underfoot. Not the sharp crack of fresh wood, but the brittle, reluctant give of something long dead and pressed into service. My fingers curled around the bruised side, the flesh yielding like overripe cheese beneath my thumbs, and I pried. The core resisted first, then surrendered with a wet thunschlick, the sound of something viscous detaching from its bed. The cavity yawned open, a hollow the color of old bone, and from it oozed a sap the color of rusted iron, thick and slow as if the fruit itself was bleeding. I let it drip onto the counter, watching the crimson threads stretch and break, each drop landing with a tiny fwin plink that made my teeth ache. The air smelled suddenly of charred hair, the acrid tang of something burned beyond recognition, and I realized with a jolt that the ash filling the pear's cavity wasn't just ash. It was rearranging itself. The grains shifted on my palm, coalescing into a shape that wasn't a shape at all, just the suggestion of a stain, a darkening that spread like ink in water. My fingers twitched. The sap congealed between them, sticky and warm, and I rubbed it into my skin without thinking. The stain didn't just spread, it moved creeping up my wrist in tendrils that weren't quite liquid, not quite solid, like the afterimage of a bruise that hadn't yet formed. The oars outside scraped against the planks again, the sound dragging through the air like a finger down a blackboard. I didn't need to look to know they were there, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat, the creak of wood against water a counterpoint to the pier's slow, wet unraveling. The resort had been empty when I arrived, the lifts silent, the halls echoing with the hollow thud of my own footsteps. But now, with the aurora painting the windows in sickly greens and the clocks all frozen at once, I wasn't so sure anymore. Someone was out there, rowing, waiting. The cat watched me from the corner, its milky eyes reflecting the green light like twin moons caught in a tide. It didn't blink. Its tail lashed once, the tip brushing the edge of the counter, and the fur left a trail of static that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I reached for the knife, the blade cold against my palm, and sliced through the pear's remaining flesh. The core split open with a sound like a mouth unhinging, and the ash inside didn't fall. It 2020 rosy, a slow, deliberate ascent, gathering into the shape of a hand. Not my hand. Not quite. The fingers were too long, the nails blackened at the tips, And when I exhaled, the breath fogged the air between us, but the hand didn't breathe back. The stain on my wrist pulsed once, a single wet throb, and the cat's ears twitched. It stepped forward, its claws clicking against the floor like the ticks of a clock that had just begun to run again. The pear's sap dripped onto the counter, pooling into a shape that wasn't a shape, and the ash hand pressed itself against the glass, leaving a smudge that didn't wipe away. The oars scraped. The cat's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and the pear's core split open one last time, the ash dissolving into nothing but the scent of burned hair and the slow, wet drag of something scraping against wood. I should have looked away. I should have known better. But the hand in the glass was waving. The map bled, not with ink, not with water, but with a viscous crimson that stained my fingertips as I corrected the latest edition. A new route etched in arterial red across the snow. Dusted slopes of the resort, leading toward the abandoned west wing. I pressed harder, the paper resisting, the scent of iron thickening in the air. My voice, when I spoke, felt wrong. It wasn't my timbre, not precisely. It was shifted higher somehow. A strained imitation, the west wing, I murmured. The sound alien in the stillness of the room. The clocks remained frozen, their hands pointing to 3:17, a silent, mocking chorus. The cat watched, its cataract, clouded eyes reflecting the green aurora that bled through the windows, a sickly luminescence that seemed to pulse with the map, as crimson. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a tremor through the stillness. The air tasted of dust and something else, something akin to burnt sugar, but with an undertow of something sharper, more metallic. The scar on my wrist where the pear sap had stained my skin throbbed. It wasn't a simple discoloration anymore. It was raised, textured, like a brand. I examined it closely, the light catching the edges, and saw that the lines weren't just red. They were deepening, twisting, mirroring the roots on the map. The edges moved subtly, like tendrils reaching, seeking purchase on the skin. A faint, dry clicking sound emanated from the scar, almost imperceptible, like insects shifting beneath a layer of wax. I dipped the pen back into the inkwell, forcing myself to focus on the map, on the task at hand. The resort was changing, rearranging itself in real time, the bloodstains charting a course I didn't understand, but felt compelled to follow. Each correction felt like a violation, a further blurring of the line between what was and what wasn't. The map was just a guide. It was a record, a chronicle of something unfolding, something that was somehow becoming me. My voice sighed again, a drawn-out exhalation that felt like a physical wrench. The pitch shifted again, a fraction higher, closer to the sound I'd been hearing in the corridors, the echo of something that wasn't quite me. The cat's tail lashed a sharp, rhythmic flick against the floorboards. I ignored it, focusing on the next correction, a new path leading to the abandoned generator room. The scent of burned sugar intensified, cloying and suffocating. I coughed, the taste bitter on my tongue. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the frozen clocks a silent audience to my unraveling. The cat padded closer, its claws clicking softly against the polished wood. It rubbed against my leg, a rough, insistent pressure that made my skin crawl. I pushed it away gently, but it persisted, weaving between my feet. The map bled further, the crimson seeping into my skin, the scar widening, the lines growing more complex. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching someone else make the corrections, someone who looked like me but wasn't Stauk. A coldness settled in my bones, a profound and unsettling chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. The oars scraped against the planks outside, a slow, deliberate rhythm that resonated with the ticking of the frozen clocks. "It's all a game," I said. The voice that emerged not my own but a distorted echo of it. The cat stopped rubbing and stared, its milky eyes reflecting the green aurora. It let out a low, guttural sound, a noise that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a purr. It was something else, something ancient and unsettling. I looked down at my hands, at the crimson staining my fingertips, at the scar that twisted across my wrist. They weren't my hands, not entirely. The fingers were longer, the knuckles more prominent, the skin a shade paler than I remembered. I tried to clench them, but the movement felt sluggish, unfamiliar. The cat began to speak, the sound emerging not from its mouth, but from the air around it, a voice that mirrored my own, but laced with a subtle, mocking cadence. "You, relearning, Martha," it whispered, the sound slithering into my mind. "You, re-understanding," I recoiled, stumbling backward, knocking over a stack of papers. The map slipped from my grasp, unfolding on the floor, the crimson roots spreading like a malignant vine. The scar on my wrist pulsed, a single, wet throb. The cat's ears twitched, and it took another step forward, its eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. The oars scraped again, louder this time, a frantic, insistent rhythm. The scent of burnt sugar overwhelmed me, choking me, stealing the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. My voice, the voice that was mine, echoed in my head, repeating the same phrase over and over. You relearning, you re-understanding. The cat's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and I saw something in its eyes, something that wasn't feline, something that wasn't human, something that was waiting. The map's core split open, not with a snap or a crack, but with a slow, deliberate tearing, and from the fissure emerged a shape, a shadow that wasn't quite a shadow, but a distortion of the light itself, a thing that moved and breathed and waited. I should have looked away, I should have known better, but the shadow in the map was waving. The inkwell had dried to a crust of obsidian when I realized the mistake. My fingers hovered over the stained paper, the crimson roots on the map no longer static but twitching, as if something beneath them was breathing. The air in the study had thickened, not with humidity, but with the weight of something unspoken, something that slithered just beyond the edges of my vision. I exhaled, and the sound came out wet, like a lung filling with salt water. The cat watched from its perch on the windowsill, its ancient eyes reflecting the green glow seeping through the frosted glass. Not to Aurora, I corrected myself, but something older, something that had learned to mimic the northern lights before they ever existed. I dipped my pen into the well again, but the ink refused to cooperate. It clung to the nib like syrup, resisting the pressure of my wrist. The scar on my forearm pulsed in time with my heartbeat, the raised lines now pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. I pressed harder, and the pen groaned, a sound like wet parchment tearing before finally yielding a single, uneven drop. The blood from the scar had mixed with the ink, turning it the color of bruised plums. I traced the new route with deliberate slowness, each stroke intentional, each correction a carving. Asterisk the west wing. Asterisk I whispered, the syllables sticking to my tongue like honey. The word foofened westy. Tasted of rust, and foofing left a residue of something greasy, something that clung to the roof of my mouth. The cat's tail flicked once, twice, the movement precise, mathematical. Then, without breaking its gaze, it began to write, not with claws, not with ink, with the barbs of its whiskers. They dragged across the floorboards in slow, deliberate arcs, leaving trails of dark crimson that pooled and reformed into letters. The blood wasn't just wet, it tweety spoke. The scent of it filled my lungs, sharp and metallic like the first breath after a long dive. The letters coalesced into a single word pressed into the wood like a brand. Phylern, asterisk asterisk. The clock on the mantel ticked once, then stopped. Not frozen. Erased, asterisk. The hands had vanished, leaving only the bare face, a blank eye staring back at me. The other clocks in the room followed, each striking the same hour, 3:07, a number that felt less like time and more like a command. The air hummed, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in my teeth. The cat's whiskers continued their work, carving another word into the floor. If I speak, asterisk asterisk. I didn't to understand the language. Not yet. But my mouth opened anyway, and the sound that came out wasn't mine. It was a replication, a ghost of my voice layered with something else. Something that slithered beneath the words, something that tasted of burnt sugar and old coin. The syllables formed in my mind before they left my lips, as if I were reading them from the map itself. The scar on my wrist burned, not with heat, but with the pressure of something pushing its way out. Asterisk, you must say it, asterisk. The cat's voice slithered into my skull, not through its mouth, but through the walls. Asterisk, the name that is Teat, a name. Asterisk, I swallowed. The movement felt wrong, my throat too tight, my tongue too thick. I tried to speak, but the words dissolved before they formed. The cat's eyes darkened, its pupils expanding into voids, and the letters on the floor began to writhe, the blood seeping into the cracks between the boards like a living thing. Asterisk again, asterisk. It hissed, the sound vibrating in my bones. The pen in my hand trembled. The inkwell had emptied completely, leaving only a slick, glistening residue. I pressed my finger to the scar. It split open without resistance, a thin line of crimson welling up like sap. I dipped my finger into the wound and pressed it to the map. The blood spread in a slow, deliberate spiral, forming a new route. A path that led not to the west wing, but deeper, into the walls themselves. The cat's whiskers stilled. The letters on the floor ceased their movement. The air held its breath. And then, from the darkness beyond the study, something answered. It wasn't Tita sound. It was the absence of sound. The sudden, suffocating silence of a held breath. The walls of the resort groaned, a deep, resonant twin creak, like the hull of a ship splitting at the seams. The green light outside flickered, not with movement but with hunger, and the map beneath my fingers pulsed once, twice, before the blood on it. Not seeping, not bleeding, twent for deef and not bleeding. Speaking. Asterisk, the word formed in the crimson, a single, jagged letter pressed into the paper like a nail. Fundafin. Asterisk. Asterisk. The map smelled of burnt sugar and regret. I lifted it from the floor, the charred edges crumbling like ancient parchment. The heat still radiated from it, a phantom warmth against the chill of the study. The cat watched, its eyes twin pools of green reflecting the flickering lamplight. Its gaze felt like a brand. I remembered the act, the desperate, impulsive decision to burn it, to sever the connection to what? To deny the truth etched in crimson roots, the truth that pulsed beneath my fingertips. The scent intensified, a cloying sweetness that coated my tongue, making me gag. The air thickened, not with the dampness of the coastal fog, but with a heavier, more viscous presence. I could feel it pressing against my skin, a phantom weight. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, a low, mournful sound that resonated in my bones. Fiven like the ship's timbers, straining against a relentless storm. The fire had left a residue, a dark, oily stain on the Persian rug. The ash settled on the floor, a fine, grey powder that clung to the shadows. I knelt, examining the remains, the scent of burnt paper mingling with the ever-present odor of brine and decay that permeated the resort. The map's roots had rearranged themselves in the ash, not dissolving, but reforming, coalescing into a single, grotesque image. Fur. Thivi, the cat's face. Fur, not a likeness, not a portrait, but a distortion, a mockery. The whiskers, long and sharp, formed a jagged frame around eyes that burned with an unsettling intelligence. The nose, a flattened triangle pressed against the floor, leaving a deep impression in the ash. The mouth, a thin, cruel line, opened slightly, as if in a silent snarl. It was an accusation. I recoiled, a tremor running through my limbs. The scar on my forearm throbbed, a dull, insistent ache that pulsed in time with the erratic beat of my heart. It felt as if something were trying to break free, to claw its way out of my skin. The air grew colder, the scent of burnt sugar intensifying until it became almost unbearable. Like drowning in molasses, the cat blinked, and the image in the ash shifted, the features blurring, reforming into something else. A single letter emerged from the chaos. Then another, and another, until the face was gone, replaced by a sprawling, jagged word, memory. My breath hitched in my throat. Memory, that's what it was, wasn't it? Not a map, not a guide, but a repository of forgotten horrors, a catalogue of sins. The words echoed in my mind, not as sounds but as vibrations, as physical sensations. Physically dent hammered into my skull. Whir, I stood, my legs unsteady, and stumbled towards the door. The study felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the shadows pressing against me. The cat did not move, its eyes fixed on my back, a silent, unwavering presence. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that tightened my chest. For like the silence before a storm, as I reached the door, I noticed something new, a faint shimmer in the air, a distortion of the light, a subtle shift in the pattern of the wallpaper. I ran my hand over the surface, feeling the texture of the paper, the rough grain beneath my fingertips. It wasn't wallpaper, it was a screen, a projection. The image flickered, resolving into a scene, a hallway from the west wing. But different. The walls were not the same shade of grey. The light was softer, warmer. The air seemed peaceful. And then I saw her. A woman, standing at the end of the hallway, bathed in a golden light. She was smiling, a genuine, heartfelt smile. She looked familiar, too familiar. I took a step closer, drawn towards the image, towards the promise of warmth and comfort. The cat let out a low hiss, a warning that vibrated through the floorboards. Then, like the grinding of ancient gears, Unfi ignored it. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the projected image. The hallway rippled, the woman's smile faltering, the light dimmed. The scene began to dissolve, and then I saw it. Behind the woman, In the shadows at the end of the hallway, something moved. A flicker, a distortion, a shape. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was wrong. The scar on my forearm burned again, this time with searing pain. The scent of burnt sugar intensified, overwhelming my senses. The cat's hiss escalated into a frantic caterwaul, a lament for a lost soul. The hallway vanished. The image disappeared. The study returned to its familiar gloom, but the scent remained, and the shape lingered at the edge of my vision, a fleeting glimpse of something monstrous lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The cat began to write again, its whiskers carving a single word into the floorboards. Shiver turn. The pear was almost too ripe, the skin yielding to the slightest pressure, a bruised plum color deepening towards the stem. I held it, the weight strangely comforting, the scent faintly floral, masking something else, something acrid, like burnt sugar and old pennies. I found a small, dull knife in the drawer. The blade nicked and stained and began to carve, not with intent, not with purpose, but as if compelled. The knife slipped easily through the flesh, a soft resistance, then a sudden give. The juice, a viscous dark red, welled up, coating the blade. It smelled of autumn and something wrong. The cat watched, perched on the edge of the vanity, its ancient eyes following my movements. The cataracts clouded the green but didn't diminish the intensity. It didn't blink. The wood of the vanity groaned beneath its weight, a low, complaining sound. I traced the pear's curve, the shape almost an echo of the map, the roots twisting and turning within its flesh. I carved slowly, meticulously, the knife scraping against the skin, a dry, rasping sound. The room was silent save for that, and the distant moan of the wind against the shuttered windows. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing, not consciously. My hand moved on its own, guided by a memory I couldn't quite grasp. A name, a face, a feeling of profound loss. The knife found the stem, and I began to shape it, slowly, painstakingly. The pear's skin was surprisingly resilient, holding the form, resisting my efforts. The scent intensified, a cloying sweetness that clung to the back of my throat, coating my tongue. It tasted of regret. The scar on my forearm pulsed, a dull ache that radiated outwards, spreading through my arm, my shoulder, my chest. It felt as if something was stirring beneath my skin, a restless, trapped thing. I ignored it, focusing on the carving. The pear was almost complete, a rough, imperfect likeness, but recognizable. The cat's face, the lines were crude, the features distorted, but there it was, a mockery of life, captured in the yielding flesh of a fruit. As I finished the last detail, a line representing a whisker, the pear split, not with a clean break, but a messy, tearing sound. A dark, coppery sap oozed out, spreading across the vanity, staining the wood. It smelled metallic, almost like blood. The map. The roots hadn't simply appeared in the sap, they everywhere. The sap swirling and shifting, reforming. The lines pulsed with a faint internal light, a sickly greenish glow. I stared, mesmerized, as the map unfolded, not on the surface, but within the pear. The roots rearranged themselves, coalescing, merging, until they formed a single, terrifying image. A coastline, a familiar coastline, the coastline of this resort, and superimposed upon it, a network of tunnels, of caverns, of hidden passages. The tunnels led to a central point, a dark, gaping hole in the earth. A place I knew, the place I had been trying to forget. The cat shifted, its claws extending, retracting, digging into the wood of the vanity. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a vibration that resonated in my bones. The air grew colder, the scent of burnt sugar intensifying until it became almost unbearable. It felt as if the room was shrinking, the walls closing in, the shadows pressing against me. I could feel the weight of the past, the burden of my sins crushing me. The sap continued to flow, spreading across the vanity, forming a miniature landscape, a distorted reflection of the world outside. The tunnels deepened, the caverns expanded, the hole in the earth grew wider, darker, more ominous. The roots pulsed with the same sickly greenish glow. The pear itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, as if it were alive. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the surface of the sap. It was cold, viscous, and strangely alive. The image rippled, the coastline blurring, the tunnels shifting, the hole in the earth yawning open. A voice, a distorted echo of my own, whispered in my ear, "Return." It wasn't a spoken word, not a sound, but a vibration, a physical sensation, like a hand pressing against my skull. The cat's eyes narrowed, the pupils slitting into vertical lines. It let out a short, sharp hiss, a warning that vibrated through the room. The sap began to glow brighter, the greenish light illuminating the vanity, casting long, distorted shadows. The image of the tunnels intensified, the hole in the earth growing larger, deeper, more inviting. I felt a pull, a compulsion, a desperate urge to follow the roots, to descend into the darkness, to confront whatever lay hidden below. The scar on my forearm burned again, this time with searing pain. The scent of burnt sugar became overwhelming, choking me, suffocating me. The pear pulsed, faster, stronger, its flesh expanding, straining, threatening to burst. And the hole in the earth, it was calling my name. The sap flowed faster, the map completed, a single jagged route leading directly to the darkness. The cat, still watching, began to carve again, its claws digging into the pear, a new word forming in the crimson sap P30 send. I traced the fur, a slow, deliberate rhythm against the back of my hand. Not the soft down of a kitten, but something coarser. Older, each stroke revealed a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Not random, not haphazard, but deliberate. The cat didn't flinch, didn't purr, didn't even blink. Its gaze, clouded with a milky film of cataracts, felt like a weight. A pressure against my skull. The clocks they stopped again. Not all at once, not with a jarring halt, but a staggered cessation. First the grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum swinging once, twice, then freezing mid-arc. Then the small travel clock on the bedside table, its hands arrested at 3:07, and the kitchen clock, a gaudy, plastic thing, joining the silent chorus. Always 3:07. A constant, brittle reminder. A chipped tooth in the mechanism of time. The air itself felt stilled, as if holding its breath. I ran my fingers across the vanity, the wood cool and slick beneath my touch. The mirror, clouded with age, offered back a distorted reflection. Not of the room, not precisely, but of something twin beneath the room. A shifting, watery darkness, and then, for a fleeting moment, I saw it. My face, or what was left of it. The skin stretched thin, the eyes hollowed, the lips drawn back in a silent scream. A bloom of bruised plum darkening the hollows of my cheeks. The reflection dissolved, leaving only the dim, clouded glass. But the image lingered, a phantom ache in my jaw. The cat shifted, its weight on the vanity causing a subtle groan. It began to knead the surface, not with claws extended, but with a rhythmic, insistent pressure. And as it did, the fur beneath my fingers began to change, not in color, not in texture, but in footine form. The strands twisted, coiled, elongated, until they felt less like fur and more like fibers. Fine, brittle threads. I traced them with my fingertip, and a shape began to emerge, a line. Then another, and another. They weren't random. They were letters, a language, one I didn't recognize. The cat's fur, the canvas, its body, the pen, and I, the unwilling reader. The scent intensified, the sickly sweetness of the pear clinging to the back of my throat. A coppery tang, the taste of old blood. The map within the pear wasn't just a representation of the tunnels. It was Sunday infecting everything. The air, the room, my thoughts. I tried to pull away, to break the connection, but my hand was frozen, locked in place. The cat's gaze intensified, the cloudy eyes boring into mine. It wasn't simply allowing this to happen. It was Swin guiding my hand, directing my movements, shaping the fur with a purpose. A cold, calculating purpose. The letters coalesced, forming words, simple words, but terrifying in their simplicity when descend. Remember, forget. Asterisk. The cat's body trembled, a subtle vibration that resonated in my bones. It was as if the creature itself was unraveling, shedding layers of identity. The air grew colder, a creeping chill that seeped into my marrow. The aurora borealis, visible through the shuttered windows, pulsed with a sickly greenish glow. It wasn't the natural, ethereal light of the aurora. It was something wrong, something corrupted. The light seemed to seep into the room, illuminating the vanity, casting long, distorted shadows. And in those shadows, I saw them, other faces, fragments of memories, faces I had tried to bury, faces that had haunted my dreams for years. The cat's fur continued to transform, the letters becoming more complex, more intricate. A story unfolding, not on paper, not on parchment, but on the living flesh of a creature. The words twisted, merged, reformed, until they formed a single terrifying sentence. A sentence that echoed in the hollows of my mind. Fudi, the garden remembers your name. Asterisk, the floorboards creaked beneath my feet, a subtle, unsettling sound. A sound that seemed to come from city below, from the tunnels. From the hole in the earth, I looked down at the vanity, at the miniature landscape of sap and decay. The tunnels had deepened. The caverns had expanded. The hole in the earth had grown wider, darker, more inviting. The roots pulsed with the same sickly, greenish glow, and superimposed upon it a new image. My own face, distorted, filled with a nameless dread. The cat's eyes reflected the image, not a reflection, not a mirror image, but emerging. My face, its face, the landscape, the tunnels, the hole in the earth, all blending together into a single, terrifying whole. The cat's fur felt warm now, radiating a heat that burned against my skin. And as I traced the final letter, a new word formed, carved into the cat's back, etched into my mind. A word that sealed my fate. A word that opened the way. A word that whispered my doom, follow. Asterisk, asterisk. I pressed the cat's fur into the salt water, the crystals biting my palm like shattered glass. The water wasn't clear, it was thick, swirling with the ghost of the map's bloodstains, dark as bruised plum. The cat didn't resist. It sank, a slow, deliberate descent, its cataract eyes clouding over. I felt the fuvosity of salt on its fur, the sizzle of something dissolving. The air grew heavy, thick with the coppery tang of old blood. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The rhythmic thwack of oars on water the still died gone, replaced by a new sound, 1,000 for scrape sea, sharp and dry like bone dragged over stone. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The noise echoed in the hollows of my skull, a sound that wasn't water, wasn't air, but something older, deeper, Fundrongsi, Rongdi. The aurora borealis pulsed sickly green through the shuttered windows, casting long, distorted shadows that fundiapled like disturbed water on the vanity. The cat broke the surface first, not rising, but pulling itself up, as if the water itself was tugging. Its fur was slick, clinging, the graying whiskers now dark with brine. It didn't look like itself. The shape was shifted, the clouded eyes held a new light, a terrible clarity. Its body was Martha's former victim, older, thinner, the skin stretched tight over sharp bones. The map was in its jaws, the bloodstains soon glistening like fresh wounds. Not Martha's blood, the victim's. The blood had seeped into the map's paper, turning the ink to something thinner, rotten, deep purple black. The cat's body trembled. A loathsome vibration ran through the floorboards, a sound felt in the teeth, not the ears. The air turned colder, a creeping chill that burned. The victim's face, Martha's face, but tivy hollowed, the skin stretched thin over cheekbones, turned toward me. Its mouth opened, not a sound. Just the raspy of its throat, like dry leaves skittering over stone. And then the voice, not the cat's, not the victim's. Martha's own voice, but warped, thinner, older. The voice that had whispered, descend, remember, forget. In the vanity's reflection, it came from the cat's throat, a sound that felt like my own bones grinding down. You forgot the fire. The words weren't a whisper. They were a thrust it into my mind, sharp as broken glass. The sound of the fire crackle, the quintessence of flames on dry wood, the frizzly flesh burning filled the room, louder than the bone scrapes. I saw it then, not memory, in truth. The fire in the cult's ritual chamber, the fire that consumed the victim, the fire I'd forgotten, the fire I'd stolen, the fire I'd stolen. The victim's face in the cat's, the victim's voice in my throat, the twin map in its jaws. The bloodstain wasn't a stain, it was a fivvy brand. A brand of my guilt. The cat's body shuddered, a violent ripple. Its form blurred, then solidified. The victim's eyes met mine, the map's bloodstains pulsed with the sickly green light. The voice rasped again, the sound of my own lips. But what wronged, you forgot the fire. The salt water dripped from the cat's fur, each drop hitting the vanity with a fun plink. Plink, 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 like tiny cold tears. The room held its breath, the bone scrapes had stopped. Only the plink, plink, plink remained, and the voice that was mine, but not. Too forgot the fire.